Okay, so as finance minister, the first thing I would do is go back to the IMF to try and renegotiate the package because under the current arrangements, there isn't much that can be done. The IMF is requiring the high interest rate, they call it real interest rate. They're requiring the primary deficit reduction, and so let's come up with a formula to service the IMF debt. That would be to agree to pay them 3%, but a tax of 3% payable in dollars on all export revenues. Now that will come out to about $2.5 billion a year. They're already in dollars. All the export revenues are in dollars. In fact, export revenues is not the trade balance, but the actual net gross export volume. That is the source of U.S. dollars for Argentina. Okay, there is no other source of dollars for all practical purposes, and so by giving the IMF a percentage of those revenues, they're getting the dollars from the source, and at that point, they don't need to care about what the peso is doing, what inflation is doing, what the primary deficit is doing. It doesn't affect their payment and their ability to have their debt properly serviced and properly repaid. So by doing that, I think they would exchange everything in that package, just tear it up, and in exchange, be guaranteed 3% of export revenues immediately at source, right off the top. And as a bank, they are a bank. What they're supposed to be looking out for is how to best get repaid. They don't have no reason to care about the rest. And so that is the best way to get repaid with any business loan, is to be able to take a percentage of the gross receipts of that business. And so this would be the equivalent for Argentina. So number one, we've got to get rid of the entire IMF package by exchanging it for a tax of 3% of gross exports. And at that point, as finance minister, I would have control, along with approval of the legislature and president. But Argentina would have control over the rest of their, all of their economic policy. And so now we can start adjusting those policies. So number one, drop the interest rate from 45%, or wherever they are now, to zero. Have a permanent zero rate policy, and don't issue any government securities. You don't need to do that. You can just have central bank credits. The government spends and credits accounts. It shows it's accounted for as an overdraft in the Treasury's account at the central bank. The central bank and the Treasury are both agents of the government. If one has a positive and one has a negative, it nets out. It doesn't matter. It has no economic consequence. The IMF has blamed part of the inflation on the fact that the central bank is monetizing the Treasury's debt. That would not be a factor in the circumstances I just talked about. So the other thing we have to do is get rid of the crawling peg. This is the crawling intervention to have an organized retreat for the currency. Along with the other policies, it's guaranteed an organized, semi-organized retreat of the currency. Now, when you have any kind of a peg, including a crawling peg, then to some degree that monetization matters, not because it causes any problem directly, but it causes the pressure on the peg. It causes foreign exchange reserves to be lost, expended while you're trying to support this crawling peg. So we're going to get rid of the IMF. We're going to get rid of the crawling peg, which comes with the IMF. We'll have we can lower interest rates to zero, not have to worry about government security. We don't have to, because that's just not an applicable concept. It's not applicable to the regime anymore. Okay, so the next thing we have to do is look for the other sources of inflation. At this point, we've probably got rid of at least half the inflation, if not more. But there are other powerful sources. They include indexation. The government's been indexing Treasury securities, selling them. To the best of my knowledge, I haven't been able to determine exactly how many. I've seen it said 80% of the securities. These are highly corrosive, toxic, explosive events that are we're also putting pressure on the crawling peg. And with a floating exchange rate, the same pressure you put on the currency, you'll get a lot of imported inflation. So those have to be stopped. I don't know how we stop them, but I compared it to to discovering there's a nuclear weapon, and somebody discovers it in Buenos Aires, and it's going to blow up the city, and you have to get rid of it. You have to dismantle it, deactivate. And they say, well, we can't because the last legislature, approved it, so we have to allow this to blow up the city. Well, at the time, they didn't know it was going to blow up the city. And the new legislature, whoever's there right now, even if it's the same people, but the new session of the legislature can deactivate this nuclear bomb that's sitting inside your currency, which is this process of selling and then servicing index treasury securities. They either have to be repurchased, if it's even possible, they have to be declared illegal, state of emergency, whatever has to be done, the same way you would deactivate a live bomb that you found, in Argentina. And so those have to be removed. The other issues that have to be looked into are government indexation of wages and of various sorts. Some of those are good, need to be left in place. Others are not, so that has to be studied. I don't have any detailed information, but you keep the good ones, and the ones that are problematic and not being used to sustain the incomes of lower income earners, anything not being used for that purpose has to be eliminated. And I don't know what they are. So, Carlos, do you remember any other things, like proposals I had? I'm driving down the highway now, and I don't have my list in front of me.
Maybe reintroducing the Jefes program.
Yes. Okay. So the other thing is, you're going to have an expanding economy, a growing economy with growing aggregate demand. You want to be able to transition labor from unemployment into private sector employment. Of course, first you want to fully provision the government, make sure you have adequate, public health workers, adequate education, adequate legal system, and everything else the government does, adequate defense, police, and good public services. But once you've got good public services, you want the rest of the unemployed to transition to the private sector, so they too can produce useful output. And to do that, we have to reactivate what used to be called the Jefes program. And today's version would be simply to offer a minimum wage job, whatever they're going to give wages, to anybody willing and able to work. And these people coming into the labor force would then show themselves to be capable workers, which is all the private sector will need to hire them, because fiscal policy is going to be kept at a level to sustain enough aggregate demand to transition people out of the new Jefes program, out of this employee buffer stock, back into the private sector. And it will not be done by bidding up anybody, any price anywhere. It's done by employing the unemployed to demonstrate that they are employable, that they are willing and able to work, and available for private sector work. And so that means adjustment of percent or so, but it's not going to be any big consequence for Argentina. Now, at that point, Argentina will have a dynamic macro system. You've still got a lot of micro issues that need to be addressed. We'll go over those later. But you'll have a gauge for how large your public debt should be. It's going to be the right size that keeps the number of workers in the transition job, the employee buffer stock, at a minimum. Because the fewer people you have there, the more you have that have been hired into the private sector, and so the more productive they are. And that will be your number one gauge for the correct size of your fiscal balance. The next thing you'll have is a currency that is internally stable. The value of the currency is being defined as the amount of pesos it takes to employ people in this transition job, this buffer stock. That becomes a numeraire for the economy. It's too much to go into in this little talk, but that becomes the primary influence on prices in the economy. You're also going to have to look at margins. I've noticed there's 10% gross interest margins in the banking system. That tells me there's some kind of a monopoly going on. Now, I may be wrong. I'll take it all back later if it turns out to be wrong, but it has the appearance of some kind of banking monopoly or cartel that is maintaining high margins in states. There may be 4%, 3.5%, which is about the most that you need to operate a banking system. And so that's become a source of inflation. It's been a source of currency depreciation. Have those funds concentrated and channeled in that direction. So there are probably other large industries, maybe industries that have been privatized, that are not being adequately regulated to ensure there isn't there aren't excessive margins, because excessive margins lead to large concentrations of capital, which leads to large desires to save non-peso savings in dollars and other currencies, and a continuous flow of people looking to sell pesos to buy dollars, to buy euro, where if those pesos were spent elsewhere in the economy, that wouldn't be the case. They wouldn't be going to people looking to put 75% of their wealth away as a foreign asset. So you want to remove those, that process. You want to remove those pesos at source from the people who are getting them and using them to fund their foreign bank accounts. Okay, you don't want to start, not that you don't want to, if you simply try and tax the money that they're earning, or you simply try to outlaw their foreign bank accounts, it doesn't work. Okay, it's not effective. You want to go at it at source. You want to eliminate the margins in banking. You want to eliminate the margins and excessive margins in state-owned enterprises and other monopolies, so that the income isn't there to begin with. You don't have to try, figure out some way to chase it down, which historically has failed every single time. Okay, thank you very much.